Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit. You know, the podcast that unpacks the latest research so you don't have to. I'm Pavlov.
I'm Nikita.
And we are diving into a paper today. It's been making some waves. It's called The Great AI Witch Hunt, Reviewers' Perception and Misconception of Generative AI in Research Writing.
Yeah, and it's published in Computers and Human Behavior, Artificial Humans. So
oh, wow.
It's a pretty big.
So a top-tier journal. We know it's been thoroughly vetted.
Right.
And speaking of credentials, the lead author, Hilda Hadan, well, she's a rising star in human-computer interaction, HCI, basically how humans interact with technology. And she's published some really interesting work on AI and user experience.
Yeah, she's one to watch, definitely.
Enough about the author. Let's jump into the paper itself.
Okay, so as the title suggests, this paper really tackles how peer reviewers are reacting to, all these new AI writing tools, things like ChatGPT and Gemini in academic research.
Yeah, those AI assistants, they could do some pretty impressive things these days. I mean, from paraphrasing and grammar correction to even drafting entire sections of a paper. But, they also raise some serious questions about transparency and academic integrity.
Exactly. And that's really where this research comes in. It tries to answer those key questions, like, can reviewers actually spot AI-generated text? Does it affect their judgment, if they suspect AI use? And maybe most importantly, what does all this mean for the future of academic writing?
Yeah, that's a big question. Lots to unpack here. So where do we even begin?
Well, the researchers started by kind of summarizing what we know, about these AI writing tools and all the concerns around them.
Okay.
And transparency is like a huge one. It's really crucial for researchers to be upfront about how they're using AI in their writing. If a reviewer suspects AI use, but it's not disclosed, that raises some big questions. About, the researcher's integrity.
It's almost like plagiarism in a way, right?
Yeah, it's in that same realm. And then you've got the issue of hallucination. That's just a fancy way of saying that the AI can generate incorrect information.
Right.
Even completely made up information.
Yeah, making stuff up.
Yeah, and it might sound convincing at first glance, but if it's not based on, real evidence, that can really damage the credibility of the research.
So even if you're just using AI to help you with your writing, you got to double check everything.
Absolutely. Fact checking and critical thinking are more important than ever. We're in this age of AI. Don't just blindly trust the machine.
Right.
So with those concerns in mind, they designed this really interesting experiment. They wanted to see how reviewers actually perceive AI generated text.
Okay, so how did they do that?
Well, they recruited 17 experienced reviewers from top HCI conferences. These are people who are used to evaluating really high quality research. And then they showed these reviewers snippets of text. Some were written by humans, some were paraphrased by AI, and others were completely generated by AI.
So like a blind taste test for academic writing.
Exactly.
Could they tell which was which?
That's the big question, right? And the results were actually pretty surprising. The reviewers really struggled to tell the difference between the human written and the AI augmented writing.
Wow, so the AI is getting good.
Yeah, those AI writing tools are getting pretty sophisticated.
I would have thought experienced reviewers would be able to, spot that pretty easily.
You'd think so. But even these seasoned experts, they had a hard time pinning down what felt off, what felt AI-ish. So then the next question is, does it even matter? Did suspecting AI use change how they judge the research?
Right, because if reviewers are biased against AI-assisted writing, that could be a huge problem.
Exactly. And that's what makes this study so interesting. Despite struggling to identify the AI, the reviewers' judgments of the research itself, they stayed consistent across the board.
Really? So it didn't matter if they thought it was AI or human. They still focused on the content.
That's right. Their opinions on the quality of the research, the methods, the contribution to the field, none of that was really influenced by their perceptions of AI.
That's actually good news for researchers.
It is.
So I can use AI to help me write.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm transparent about it,
right,
the reviewers won't hold it against me.
Exactly. That's a key takeaway here. Using AI to help your writing, it doesn't seem to negatively impact reviewers.
Okay.
As long as it's done responsibly.
Responsibly, yeah.
But you can't just let ChatGPT write your whole paper.
Right. So they dug deeper,
yeah,
right? What were the reviewers picking up on? Even if they couldn't always tell it was AI.
Exactly. They wanted to get into those reviewers' heads, so they analyzed all their open-ended responses, and that's where things get really fascinating, and sometimes even a little contradictory.
Oh, contradictory.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Okay, so some reviewers, they thought like long, convoluted sentences, that was AI.
Uh-huh.
They thought a human wouldn't write like that. But other reviewers, they thought those complex sentences were a sign of a sophisticated human writer.
So even the experts don't agree on what sounds like AI.
Exactly. It just shows how subjective all this is. And then some thought certain words like leverage or state of the art, those were dead giveaways of AI.
Too formal, robotic.
Exactly. They wanted to see that human touch,
Okay.
that personal voice.
Right. Makes sense. You want that personal voice to come through in the writing.
Exactly. And they were looking for that personal expression, that unique perspective, the real insights that the author brings.
Which makes sense, right? Because research writing, it's got to be compelling, right? It's not just like dry facts. It's how you connect those facts, how you interpret them, and how you make them relevant.
Absolutely. And that's something AI hasn't quite mastered. A lot of the reviewers pointed out that the AI snippets, they tended to be very generic. They lacked that specific evidence. They didn't really have a clear argument.
So, like, it can string words together, but it can't actually form an argument.
Pretty much, yeah. It can mimic style, but it doesn't have that critical thinking element.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the ability to really synthesize information and to draw conclusions.
Which brings us back to, AI as a tool, not a replacement.
Exactly. And that's something we're going to explore more in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at what these findings mean for both researchers and reviewers. And we'll talk about some practical tips for navigating, this new world of AI writing. Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit. Before the break, we were talking about how reviewers are reacting to, more and more people using AI in research writing.
Right.
And it was so interesting that even though they had trouble pinpointing what exactly was AI generated, they all really valued the things they associated with human writing.
Yeah, that human touch came up a lot. It's like reviewers are looking for that personal insight, that originality, something that you don't really get from AI, at least not yet.
Exactly. And it raises these really interesting questions about the future of academic writing. I mean, are we going to lose that individual voice, that unique perspective, if everyone starts relying on AI too much?
Yeah, that's a good point. What did the researchers think about that?
Well, they really stressed that researchers need to be the driving force behind their work, AI should help with human thought, not replace it.
So it's all about finding the right balance. Use AI to improve clarity, structure, but don't let it take over the thinking, the ideas.
Exactly. And remember, AI is still pretty new, right? Who knows what it'll be able to do in a few years.
Yeah, who knows?
But for now, it's all about using it ethically and thoughtfully. And speaking of ethics, this study also made me think about the peer review process itself. It's like we're in a whole new world, and the old rules might not work anymore.
Right. We can't ignore the fact that AI is everywhere now.
Yeah.
So how do we change peer review to make sure it's still fair,
Well, the authors of the study really argued that we need to update reviewer guidelines and training to deal with this new reality of AI writing. Because right now, it seems like reviewers are just on their own trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, and we saw how that can be misleading, right? Mm-hmm. Some reviewers thought long sentences meant AI, and others thought it meant the writer was super smart.
Exactly. And that's what's so tricky. They were relying on these subjective things that could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were even penalizing writers for things that are normal in human writing.
Wow. So we need to stop this witch hunt for AI and focus on what's important. The research itself. Yeah.
Exactly. Reviewers need to be able to evaluate the substance of the research, no matter how it was made. They need to be aware of what AI can and can't do. And they can't let their suspicions get in the way of their judgment.
And it's worth remembering that those AI detection tools, they're not perfect either. They can actually be biased against certain writing styles. It's complicated.
It is. It's really complex. But the main takeaway here is that we need to change our approach to peer review to make sure it's still fair and objective in this new world of AI. And that means everyone needs to be more transparent, both researchers and reviewers.
Totally. Researchers need to be honest about using AI, and reviewers need to be open-minded.
Absolutely. And maybe, journals and conferences could even think about having some kind of standard way for people to disclose AI use.
Oh, interesting.
Like a checklist or a special section in the paper, just so everyone's on the same page.
That's a great idea. I'd love to see how that works.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what researchers can do to make sure they're using AI the right way. So we talked about the challenges, the concerns with AI and writing research papers, but how about some practical tips? What can researchers actually do to make sure they're using these tools the right way, ethically and effectively?
Well, first of all, just be transparent. Be open about how you're using AI. Don't try to hide it.
Right, because sneaking it past reviewers, that's just going to backfire.
Exactly. And really, it breaks down trust, you know? Transparency builds confidence. So just say it in your paper. Hey, this is how I used AI. Paraphrasing, grammar, initial drafts. Be specific.
And maybe explain why you chose to use it for those things. Give a little context.
That's a great point. Yeah, transparency is not just about disclosing. It's also about explaining your reasoning. It shows you've thought about this.
Okay, so transparency is key. What else?
Don't let AI become a crutch, right? Don't let it do the thinking for you.
Right, because it's tempting. You just plug something into ChatGPT, it spits out a whole section. But is that really your work then?
Exactly. You got to stay involved, Use AI to brainstorm, try out different phrases, polish your writing, but don't let it take over your ideas or your arguments.
So AI should enhance your thinking, not replace it.
Perfectly said. And one more thing. Always fact check anything that comes from an AI. Remember those hallucinations we talked about?
The AI making stuff up. Yeah, that's a little scary.
It can really mess things up, Make your research inaccurate, even invalid. Don't just blindly trust the AI. Check everything against a reliable source.
Like any other source you'd cite in your paper, right? Check it, make sure it's credible, make sure it fits with what you know.
Exactly. Great advice. And finally, don't forget to be human. Reviewers, they want those insights, that analysis, that reflection, things only a human can do.
Put your own voice in there, your own perspective. Let your passion for the research show.
Exactly. That's what makes research writing interesting, engaging. And that's what sets it apart from something a machine would make.
Okay, so those are great tips for researchers. But what about the reviewers? What should they keep in mind with all this AI stuff going on?
I think the most important thing is just to be aware of their own biases, It's easy to get caught up in trying to catch AI, but the goal of peer review is to evaluate the research, How good is it? How rigorous is it?
Don't get sidetracked playing AI detective.
Right. Focus on the substance. Are the arguments solid? Is the methodology sound? Does it actually contribute something new to the field? Those are the questions that matter.
And if there are real concerns about academic integrity, address those the right way. But don't let suspicions about AI lead to, accusations or unfair reviews.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important for reviewers to learn about AI, how it works, what it can and can't do. The more they understand, the better judgments they can make.
And maybe journals and conferences could help with that, provide some training, some resources for reviewers.
Definitely. It's good for everyone to make sure peer review stays fair and effective, even with AI in the picture.
So it sounds like we're all in this together, right? Researchers, reviewers, journals, conferences. We all have to adapt to this new world.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about fighting change, it's about figuring it out together. And ultimately, it's about using AI to help us learn and understand, but without losing sight of what makes human scholarship so important.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up. If you want to learn more about the study we discussed, you'll find the link in the show notes.
And be sure to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit for more deep dives into the latest research.
And while you're at it, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It helps other people discover the show.
Thanks for listening.